We continue with Aristides from Plutarch's Lives, translated by John Dryden, revised by Arthur Hugh Clough. Of all his virtues, the common people were most affected with his justice because of its continual and common use, and thus, though of mean fortune and ordinary birth, he possessed himself of the most kingly and divine appellation of just, which kings, however, and tyrants have never sought after, but have taken delight to be surnamed besiegers of cities, thunderers, conquerors, are eagles again, and hawks, affecting, it seems, the reputation which proceeds from power and violence, rather than that of virtue, though the divinity to whom they desire to compare and assimilate themselves excels, it is supposed, in three things: immortality, power, and virtue, of which three the noblest and divinest is virtue. Well, if it's really divine quality, let's not discriminate between them. For the elements and vacuum have an everlasting existence. Earthquakes, thunders, storms, and torrents have great power, but in justice and equity nothing participates except by means of reason and the knowledge of that which is divine. And thus, taking the three varieties of feeling commonly entertained towards deity, the sense of this happiness, the fear and honor of him, people would seem to think him blessed and happy for this exemption from death and corruption, to fear and dread him for his power and dominion, but to love, honor, and adore him for his justice. Yet, though thus disposed, they covet that immortality which our nature is not capable of, and that power, the greatest part of which is at the disposal of fortune, but give virtue, the only divine good really in our reach, the last place, most unwisely, since justice makes the life of such as are in prosperity, power, and authority, as if it's the life of a god, and injustice turns into that of a beast, or a demon, really, right? But not demon, in our English sense, that it's somebody's a being that's chosen evil. Aristides, therefore, had the first fortune to be beloved for this surname, but at length envied, especially when Themistocles spread a rumor amongst the people that by determining and judging all matters privately, he had destroyed the courts of judicature, and was secretly making way for a monarchy in his own person, without the assistance of guards. Moreover, the spirit of the people, now grown high and confident with their late victory, naturally entertained feelings of dislike to all of more than common frame and reputation. Coming together, therefore, from all parts into the city, they banished Aristides by the ostracism, giving their jealousy of his reputation the name of fear of tyranny. For ostracism was not the punishment of any criminal act, but was speciously said to be the mere depression and humiliation of excessive greatness and power, and was in fact a gentle relief and mitigation of envious feeling, which was thus allowed to vent itself in inflicting no intolerable injury, only a 10 years' banishment. But after it came to be exercised upon base and villainous fellows, they desisted from it, Hyperbolus being the last whom they banished by the ostracism. The cause of Hyperbolus's banishment is said to have been this: Alcibiades and Nicias, men that bore the greatest sway in the city, were of different factions. As the people, therefore, were about to vote the ostracism, and obviously to decree it against one of them, consulting together and uniting their parties, they contrived the banishment of Hyperbolus, upon which the people, being offended as if some contempt or affront was put upon the thing, left off and quite abolished it. It was performed, to be short, in this manner: everyone taking an ostracon, a sherd that is, our piece of earthenware, wrote upon it the citizen's name he would have banished, and carried it to a certain part of the marketplace, surrounded with wooden rails. First the magistrates numbered all the sherds in gross, for it were less than 6,000. The ostracism was imperfect. Then, laying every name by itself, they pronounced him whose name was written by the larger number banished for 10 years with the enjoyment of his estate. As therefore they were writing names on the sherds, it is reported that an illiterate clownish fellow, giving Aristides his sherd, supposing him a common citizen, begged him to write Aristides upon it, and he being surprised and asking if Aristides had ever done him any injury, "Not at all," said he, "neither know I the man, but I am tired of hearing him everywhere called the just." Aristides, hearing this, is said to have made no reply, but returned the sherd with his own name inscribed. At this departure from the city, lifting up his hands to heaven, made a prayer. The verse, it would seem, of that of Achilles, that the Athenians might never have any occasion which should constrain them to remember Aristides. Nevertheless, 3 years after, when Xerxes marched through Thessaly and Boeotia into the country of Attica, repealing the law, they decreed the return of the banished, chiefly fearing Aristides, lest he join himself to the enemy. He should corrupt and bring over many of his fellow citizens to the party of the barbarians. They didn't understand their language. That's what that means. Much mistaking the man who already before the decree was exerting himself to excite and encourage the Greeks to the defense of their liberty. And afterwards, when Themistocles was general with absolute power, he assisted him in all ways, both in action and in counsel, rendering the consideration of the common security the greatest enemy he had, the most glorious of men. For when Eurybiades was deliberating to desert the isle of Salamis, and the galleys of barbarians putting out by night to sea surrounded and beset the narrow passage and islands, and nobody was aware how they were environed, Aristides with great hazard sailed from Aegina through the enemy's fleet, and coming by night to Themistocles' tent, and calling him out by himself, "If we have any direction," said he, "Themistocles, laying aside at that time our vain and childish contention, let us enter upon a safe and honorable dispute, vying with each other for the preservation of Greece, you in the ruling and commanding, I in the subservient and advising part, even indeed, as I now understand you to be alone adhering to the best advice, in counseling without any delay to engage in the straits, and in the time, though our own party oppose, the enemy seems to assist you, for the sea behind and all around us is covered with their fleet, so that we are under a necessity of approving ourselves men of courage, and fighting whether we will or no, for there is no room left for us to flight." To which Themistocles answered, "I would not willingly, Aristides, be overcome by you on this occasion, and we shall endeavor in emulation of this good beginning to outdo it in my actions." Also, relating to him the stratagem he had framed against the barbarian, he entreated him to persuade Eurybiades and show him how it was impossible they should save themselves without an engagement, as he was the more likely to be believed. Whence, in the council of war, Cleocritus, the Corinthian, telling Themistocles that Aristides did not like his advice, as he was present and said nothing, Aristides answered that he should not have held his peace if Themistocles had not been giving the best advice, and that he was now silent, not out of any good will to the person, but in approbation of his counsel. Thus the Greek captains were employed, but Aristides, perceiving Psatalea, a small island that lies within the straits over against Salamis, to be filled by a body of the enemy, put aboard his small boats the most forward and courageous of his countrymen, and went ashore upon it, and joining battle with the barbarians slew them all, except such more remarkable persons as were taken alive. Amongst these were 3 children of Sundaus, the king's sister, whom he immediately sent away to Themistocles, and it is stated that in accordance with a certain oracle, they were by the command of Euphrantides, the seer, sacrificed to Bacchus, called the Amestes, or the devourer. But Aristides, placing armed men all around the island, lay in wait for such as were cast upon it, to the intent that none of his friends should perish, nor any of his enemies escape. For the closest engagement of the ships, and the main fury of the whole battle, seems to have been about this place, for which reason a trophy was erected in Psatalea, and, well, it's in, perhaps devourer in sense of somebody giving their own life and continuing living, or whether or not they're going to live or die in that task sort of thing, but you don't have to, give of anything other than your own means and your own effort. Of course, they were saying, oh, they're slaves, but I'm not saying that human sacrifice is ever necessary, or it's that sort of stuff. But it's it's fitting that they got the the devourer. Pick a name or a context when they're doing any ritual to make it work. But yeah, these Greeks, they just I don't know whether they deep down thought that there were going to be extra people, or what the deal was, why they just kept doing that. And did these entities whisper, right? When they call Satan the prince of the air, they mean the suggestions, the whisperings of the demons. After the fight, Themistocles, to sound Aristides, told him that they had performed a good piece of service, but there was a better yet to be done: the keeping Asia in Europe. Not the same thing as we say Asia nowadays, as a continent. It kind of started as, okay, well, Europe is like Afghanistan in the west, and north of Syria, right? But then they kind of moved it over and had Turkey like at the edge of Europe and Africa and Asia. By sailing forthwith to Hellespont and cutting in asunder the bridge, but Aristides, with an exclamation, bid him think no more of it, but deliberate and find means for removing the Mede as quickly as possible out of Greece, lest, being enclosed through want of means to escape, necessity should compel him to force his way with so great an army. So Themistocles once more dispatched Arnicus, the eunuch, his prisoner, giving him in command privately to advertise the king that he had diverted the Greeks from their intention of setting sail for the bridges, out of the desire he felt to preserve him. Xerxes, being much terrified with this, immediately hastened to Hellespont, but Mardonius was left with the most serviceable part of the army, about 300,000 men, and was a formidable enemy, confident in his infantry and writing messages of defiance to the Greeks. You have overcome by sea men accustomed to fight on land and unskilled at the oar, but there lies now the open country of Thessaly and the plains of Boeotia. Offer a broad and worthy field for brave men, either horse or foot, to contend in. But he sent privately to the Athenians, both by letter and word of mouth from the king, promising to rebuild their city, to give them a vast sum of money, and constitute them lords of all Greece, on condition they were not engaged in the war. The Lacedaemonians, receiving news of this, and fearing, dispatched an embassy to the Athenians, entreating that they would send their wives and children to Sparta, and receive support from them on their superannuated. For, being despoiled both of their city and their country, the people were suffering extreme distress. Having given audience to the ambassadors, they returned to answer upon the motion of Aristides, worthy of the highest admiration, declaring that they forgave their enemies if they thought all things purchasable by wealth, than which they knew nothing of greater value, but that they felt offended at the Lacedaemonians for looking out to their present poverty and exigence, without any recompense of their valor and magnanimity, offering them their victuals to fight in the cause of Greece. Aristides, making this proposal and bringing back the ambassadors into the assembly, charged them to tell the Lacedaemonians that all the treasure on the earth or under it was of less value with the people of Athens than the liberty of Greece, and showing the sun to those who came from Mardonius, as long as that retains the same course, so long, said he, shall the citizens of Athens wage war with the Persians for the country which has been wasted, and the temples that have been profaned and burnt by them. Moreover, he proposed a decree that the priests should anathematize him who sent any herald to Medes or deserted the alliance of Greece. When Mardonius made a second incursion into the country of Attica, the people passed over again into the isle of Salamis. Aristides, being sent to Lacedaemon, approved them for their delay and neglect in abandoning Athens once more to the barbarians, and demanded their assistance for that part of Greece which was not as yet lost. The Ephori, hearing this, made show of sporting all day, and of carelessly keeping holy day, for they were then celebrating the Hyacinthian festival. But in the night, selecting 5,000 Spartans, each of whom was attended by 7 helots, they sent them forth unknown to those from Athens, and when Aristides again reprehended them, they told him in derision that he either doubted or dreamed, for the army was already to Arestium in their march towards the strangers, as they called the Persians. Aristides answered that they jested unseasonably, deluding their friends instead of their enemies. Thus says Idomeneus. But in the decree of Aristides, not himself, but Cimon, Xanthippus, and Leonidas are appointed ambassadors. Being chosen general for the war, he repaired to Plataea with 8,000 Athenians, where Pausanias, generalissimo of all Greeks, joined him with the Spartans, and the forces of the other Greeks came into them. The whole encampment of the barbarians extended along the bank of the river Asopus, their numbers being so great that there was no enclosing them all, but their baggage and most valuable things were surrounded with a square bulwark, each side of which was the length of 10 furlongs. Tisamenus, the Elean, had prophesied to Pausanias and all the Greeks, and foretold them victory if they had made no attempt upon the enemy, but stood on their defense. But Aristides, sending to Delphi, then to the answer that the Athenians should overcome their enemies in case they made supplication to Jupiter and Juno of Kithaeron, Pan, and the nymphs Sphragides, and sacrificed to the heroes Androcrates, Leucon, Pisander, Democrates, Hepsion, Ectaon, and Palaidas. And if they fought within their own territories in the plain of Caris, Eleusinia, and Proserpine, Aristides was perplexed upon the tidings of this oracle, since the heroes to whom it commanded him to sacrifice had been chieftains of the Plataeans, and the cave of the nymphs, Sphragistids, was on the top of Mount Kithaeron, on the side facing the setting of summertime, the setting sun of summertime, in which place, as the story goes, there was formerly an oracle, and many that lived in the district were inspired with it, whom they called Nympholeptae, possessed with the nymphs. But the plain of Ceres, Eleusina, and the offer to the Athenians, they fought in their own territories, recalled them again, transferred the war into the country of Attica. But wasn't that the mountain that they believed that there was the Chimaera, the goat snake? Goat snake lion. What was that thing? And this juncture, Aristides, who Aristides, who commanded the Plataeans, dreamt that Jupiter, the Saviour, asked him what the Greeks had resolved upon, and that he answered, "Tomorrow, my lord, we march our army to Eleusis, and there gave the barbarians battle according to the directions of the oracle of Apollo." And then that entity replied, they were utterly mistaken, for that the places spoken of by the oracle were within the bounds of Plataea, and if they sought there, they should find them. This manifest vision having appeared to Aristides, when he awoke, he sent for the most aged and experienced of his countrymen, with whom, communicating and examining the matter, he found that near Hesea, at the foot of Mount Kithaeron, there was a very ancient temple called the Temple of Ceres, Eleusina, and Proserpine. He therefore forthwith took Aristides to the place, which was very convenient for drawing up an army of foot, because the slopes at the bottom of the mountain Kithaeron rendered the plain where it comes up to the temple unfit for the movements of cavalry. Also in the same place there was the fane of Endocrates, environed with a thick shady grove, and that the oracle might be accomplished in all particulars for the hope of victory. Aristides proposed, and the Plataeans decreed, that the frontiers of their country towards Attica should be removed, and the land given to the Athenians, that they might fight in defense of Greece in their own proper territory. The zeal and liberality of the Plataeans became so famous that Alexander, many years after, when he had obtained the dominion of all Asia, upon erecting the walls of Plataea, caused the proclamation to be made by the herald at the Olympic Games, that the king did the Plataeans this favor in consideration of their nobleness and magnanimity, because in the war with the Medes he freely gave up their land and zealously fought with the Greeks. The Tegeatans, contesting the post of honor with the Athenians, demanded that, according to custom, the Lacedaemonians, being ranged on the right wing of the battle, they might have the left, alleging several matters in commendation of their ancestors. The Athenians, being indignant at the claim, Aristides came forward to contend with the Tegeatans. Said he, "For noble descent and valor, the present time permits not. But this we say to you, O you Spartans, and you, the rest of the Greeks, that place neither takes away nor contributes courage. We shall endeavor by crediting and maintaining the post you assign us to reflect no dishonor on our former performances. For we are come not to differ with our friends, but to fight our enemies, not to extol our ancestors, but ourselves to behave as valiant men. This battle will manifest how much each city captain and private soldier is worth to Greece. The council of war upon the address, decided for the Athenians, and gave them the other wing of the battle. All Greece being in suspense, and especially the affairs of the Athenians unsettled, certain persons of great families and possessions, having been impoverished by the war, and seeing all their authority and reputation in the city vanished with their wealth, and others in possession of their honors and places, convened privately at a house in Plataea, and conspired for the dissolution of the democratic government, and if the plot should not succeed, to ruin the cause and betray all the barbarians. These matters being in agitation in the camp, and many persons already corrupted, Aristides, perceiving the design and dreading the present juncture of time, determined neither to let the business pass unadverted upon, unadverted upon, nor yet altogether to expose it, not knowing how many the accusation might reach, and willing to set bounds to his justice with a view to the public convenience. Therefore, of many that were concerned, he apprehended 8, only 2 of whom were first proceeded against, and most guilty, Aeschines of Lamprey and Agesius of Arcana, made their escape out of the camp. The rest he dismissed, giving opportunity to such as thought themselves concealed to take courage and repent, intimating that they had in the great war a great tribunal, where they might clear their guilt by manifesting their sincere and good intentions towards their country. After this, Mardonius made trial of the Grecian courage by sending his whole number of horse, in which he thought himself much the stronger against them, while they were all pitched at the foot of Mount Kithaeron in strong and rocky places, except the Megarians. They, being 3,000 in number, were encamped on the plain, where they were damaged by the horse, charging and making inroads upon them on all hands. They sent therefore in haste to Pausanias, demanding relief, as not being able alone to sustain the great numbers of the barbarians. Pausanias, hearing this, and perceiving the tents of the Megarians already hid by the multitude of darts and arrows, and themselves driven together into a narrow space, was at a loss himself how to aid them with his battalion of heavily armed Lacedaemonians. He proposed it, therefore, as a point of emulation in valor and love of distinction to the commanders and captains who were around him, if any would voluntarily take them the defense and succor of the Megarians. The rest being backward, Aristides undertook the enterprise for the Athenians, and sent Olympiodorus, the most valiant of his inferior officers, with 300 chosen men, and some archers under his command, these being soon in readiness, and running upon the enemy as soon as Mecistius, who commanded the barbarian horse, a man of wonderful courage and of extraordinary bulk and comeliness of person, perceived it, turning his steed, he made toward them, and they, sustaining the shock and joining battle with him, there was a sharp conflict, as though by this encounter they were to try the success of the whole war. But after Mecistius's horse received a wound and flung him, and he falling could hardly raise himself through the weight of his armor, the Athenians, pressing upon him with blows, could not easily get at his person, armed as he was, his breast, his head, and his limbs all over, with gold and brass and iron. But one of them, at last running with him at the visor of his helmet, slew him, and the rest of the Persians, leaving the body, fled. The greatness of the Greek success was known, not by the multitude of the slain, for an inconsiderable number were killed, but by the sorrow the barbarians expressed, for they shaved the plain themselves, their horses and mules, for the death of Mecistius, and filled the plain with howling and lamentation, having lost a person who, next to Mardonius himself, was by many degrees the chief among them, both for valor and authority. After this skirmish of the horse, they kept from fighting a long time, for the soothsayers by the sacrifices foretold the victory both of the Greeks and Persians, if they stood upon the defensive part only, but if they became aggressors, the contrary. At length, Mardonius, when he had but a few days' provision, and the Greek forces increased continually by some or other that came into them, impatient of delay, determined to lie still no longer, but passing Asopus by daybreak, to fall unexpectedly upon the Greeks. It's normally my time to eat here. And signified the same overnight to the captains of his hosts. But about midnight, a certain horseman stole into the Greek camp, and coming to the watch, desired them to call Aristides, the Athenian, to him. He coming speedily, I am, said the stranger, Alexander, king of the Macedonians, and am arrived here through the greatest danger in the world, for the goodwill I bear you, lest a sudden onset should dismay you. For as to behave in the fight worse than usual, for tomorrow, Mardonius will give you battle, urged not by any hope of success or courage, but by want of victuals, since indeed the prophets prohibit him the battle, the sacrifices and oracles being unfavorable, and the army is in despondency, consternation, but necessity forces him to try his fortune, or sit still and endure the last extremity of want. Alexander, thus saying, entreated Aristides to take notice and remember him, but not to tell any other. But he told him it was not convenient to conceal the matter from Pausanias, because he was general. As for any other, he would keep it secret from them till the battle was fought. But if the Greeks obtained the victory, that then no one should be ignorant of Alexander's goodwill and kindness towards them. After this, the king of the Macedonians rode back again, and Aristides went to Pausanias' tent and told him. And they sent for the rest of the captains and gave orders that the army should be in battle array. Here, according to Herodotus, Pausanias spoke to Aristides, desiring him to transfer the Athenians to the right wing of the army opposite the Persians, as they would do better service against them, having been experienced in their way of combat embodied with former victories, and to give them the left, were Medizine Greeks were to make their assault. And remember, Herodotus knew where Atlantis was centered, and it wasn't some undersea kingdom or something like that. It was, a real place in West Africa. Maya's hair, they call it. Which indicates that it was actually not, that maybe it's a culture that does go back a couple million years, just like in the northeast of Africa. What was they called, the Messi, or who's those people? The Medizing Greeks? Okay. The rest of the Athenian captains regarded this as an arrogant and interfering act on the part of Pausanias, because while permitting the rest of the army to keep their stations, he removed them only from place to place, like so many helots, opposing them to the greatest strength of the enemy. But Aristides said they were altogether in the wrong. If so short a time ago they contested the left wing with the Tegeathans, and gloried in being preferred before them, now when the Lacedaemonians give them place in the right, and yield them in a manner the leading of the army, how is it they are discontented with the honor that is done them, and do not look upon it as an advantage to have to fight, not against their countrymen and kindred, but barbarians, and such as were by nature their enemies? After this, the Athenians very readily changed places with the Lacedaemonians, and there went words amongst them, as they were encouraging each other, that the enemy approached with no better arms or stouter hearts than those who fought the battle of Marathon, but had the same bows and arrows, and the same embroidered coats and gold, and the same delicate bodies and effeminate minds within, while we have the same weapons and bodies, and our courage augmented by our victories, and fight not, like others, in defense of our country only, but for the trophies of Salamis and Marathon, that they may not be looked upon as due to Miltiades, our fortune, but the people of Athens. Thus, therefore, they were making haste to change the order of their battle. Now, a lot of people claim to be tough and all that, but they're really weak inside.